Many have retired, even though they're not sick or they're not that old, but they're not going back either. I understand their anger and I sympathize with it. But I think a better solution is those strikers. They're not resigning themselves. And many have called this the great resignation, all these people quitting. But I like even better those who don't resign themselves to the bad job economy, but who fight it, who demand better, who get together with other working people to make real change happen. And that's why I want to talk to you very briefly about the last time the economy was in as bad trouble as it is now, and the people were angry and depressed as bad as they are now. It was the 1930s. It's called the Great Depression. But working people then, took them a few years after the Depression hit in 1929, but when they got going, wow, did they get going. Led by the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, which was the labor union movement at that time. Tens of millions of Americans who had never been in a union before joined one. They knew they could get a better deal if they did. And those unions, oh boy, did they do well. They worked together with social movements at the time who had those scary names, Socialist Party, Communist Party, and things like that. And together the unions and those social movements, boy, did they make changes. They forced on the government the Social Security system. That's right, the system that makes sure that when you reach retirement age, you're not thrown away like some useless doll or rag. You are respected. You're given a proper check every month for the rest of your life, so you're not a burden on your children, so you can live your life out. They got that, those workers and those social movements. And they got the first comprehensive unemployment insurance program. And they got the first minimum wage, much higher in terms of its purchasing power then than it is now.
In most non-socialist countries, the labour unions are granted special rights. They are permitted to prevent non-members from working. They are allowed to call a strike and, when on strike, are virtually free to employ violence against all those who are prepared to continue working, vis-à-vis the strikebreakers. This system assigns an unlimited privilege to those engaged in vital branches of industry. Those workers who strike cuts off the supply of water, light, food, and other necessities are in a position to obtain all they want at the expense of the rest of the population. It is true that in the United States their unions have, up till now, exercised some moderation in taking advantage of this opportunity. Other American unions and many European unions have been less cautious. They are intent upon enforcing wage increases without bothering about the disaster inevitably resulting. The interventionists are not shrewd enough to realize that labor union pressure and compulsion are absolutely incompatible with any system of social organization. The union problem has no reference whatsoever to the right of citizens to associate with one another in assemblies and associations. No democratic country denies its citizens this right. Neither does anybody dispute a man's right to stop work and to go on strike. The only question is whether or not the union should be granted the privilege of resorting with impunity to violence. This privilege is no less incompatible with socialism than with capitalism. No social cooperation under the division of labour is possible when some people, or unions of people, are granted the right to prevent by violence and the threat of violence other people from working. When enforced by violence, a strike in vital branches of production or a general strike are tantamount to a revolutionary destruction of society. A government abdicates if it tolerates any non-governmental agency's use of violence. If the government forsakes its monopoly of coercion and compulsion, anarchic conditions result. If it were true that a democratic system of government is unfit to protect unconditionally every individual's right to work in defiance of the orders of a union, democracy would be doomed. Then dictatorship would be the only means to preserve the division of labour and to avoid anarchy. What generated dictatorship in Russia and Germany was precisely the fact that the mentality of these nations made suppression of union violence unfeasible under democratic conditions. The dictators abolished strikes and thus broke the spine of labour unionism. There is no question of strikes in the Soviet Empire. It is illusory to believe that arbitration of union disputes could bring the unions into the framework of the market economy and make their functioning compatible with the preservation of domestic peace. Judicial settlement of controversies is feasible if there is a set of rules available, according to which individual cases can be judged. But if such a code is valid and its provisions are applied to the determination of the height of wage rates, it is no longer the market which fixes them, but the code and those who legislate with regard to it. Then the government is supreme and no longer the consumers buying and selling on the market. If no such code exists, a standard according to which a controversy between employers and employees could be decided is lacking. It is vain to speak of fair wages in the absence of such a code. The notion of fairness is nonsensical if not related to an established standard. In practice, if the employers do not yield to the threats of the unions, arbitration is tantamount to the determination of wage rates by the government-appointed arbitrator. Peremptory authoritarian decision is substituted for the market price. The issue is always the same: the government or the market. There is no third solution.